Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching NDTV. In a major policy shift, social media company Meta has dismantled its US fact-checking program and has also reduced curbs on discussions around contentious topics such as immigration and also gender identity. Now, this move comes as Mark Zuckerberg and other tech companies are also seeking to improve relations with US President-elect Donald Trump before he takes office later this month. Now, this move is being seen as Meta's big overhaul of its approach to managing political content of its services in recent memory and comes as CEO Mark Zuckerberg has been signaling a desire to mend fences with the incoming administration. For context, Meta introduced its fact-checking program in 2016 as part of an effort to curb misinformation. Now, this initiative was launched in response to criticism over Facebook's role in spreading false claims during 2016 US presidential election. But fact-checking and disinformation research have been for long a hot button issue in a hyper-polarized political climate in the United States of America, with many saying that they were also used to curtail free speech and censor right-wing content. Now, the new system, community notes, will be phased in over the next several months and will be honed over the course of 2025. But how will this impact users' behavior on social media? Is this smart policy political appeasement or an attempt to bring in more perspectives? But what happens to the checks that are needed on hate speech? That's what we discussed tonight. Joining me now is N.S. Napine, who's a founder of Cyber Sathi, and she's also an advocate in the Supreme Court. We have Jitin Jain, who's a cybersecurity expert. Thank you both of you for joining me on this broadcast. To you, Napine, first, Donald Trump and his Republican allies have criticized Meta for its fact-checking policy, calling it censorship of right-wing voices. Meta now dismantles its own fact-checkers and they have, replacing them with community notes, which we have seen on X. But how do you see the implications? In other words, how will this decision impact content moderation on Meta-owned platforms, say Facebook, Instagram, and also Threads, which have 4 billion users? How do you see users being impacted by something like this?
Firstly, I would want to focus on India. If you look at what Meta has announced, they seem to have indicated that they are bringing about the change only for USA. If you look at some of the other jurisdictions like UK or Europe, there is a mandate that they have to do this fact-checking. They have to ensure that misinformation doesn't come into the picture. So it is not going to be possible for Meta to expand it beyond certain jurisdictions. And right now it appears to be just USA. If you look at the India perspective, and I said I'll start with that, there is a due diligence requirement in India that intermediaries have to comply with, and that includes social media intermediaries, which will include Meta. Therefore, the chances that Meta would remove fact-checking in India may not necessarily be an immediate move, as I see it. Even if they remove it, they will have to show that whatever due diligence they are exercising to ensure that misinformation is not being circulated through the platform would still remain. That threshold of liability and responsibility would still remain. But if you look at the flip side of it, Vasudha, the criticality here is this. So when the intermediary guidelines were amended to introduce a fact-checking unit of the government, which would then inform platforms for certain content to be taken down or moderated, the Supreme Court stayed that aspect on the very same grounds that it would impact free speech, and rightly so, because if any one a government or even an entity is given this kind of right, chances of the entity then having power of censorship is fairly high. So on one hand, we cannot say that this is totally a remote chance of impacting free speech, etc. But on the other hand, I think it's critical for us to understand it is not a free pass for misinformation to be spread. It is also not a free pass for a social media intermediary. They would still have to comply with their responsibilities under law.
So basically, you see this as a mixed bag. We also have Professor Zenia Behel, who's a political analyst and tech expert. But before that, let me go to Jitin Jain. You heard Napinay, and Mr. Jain, how do you see something like this? Because let me ask you a very straight question. Analysts see this as an attempt to appease U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, but some also feel that many users are not completely trusting of fact checkers, and that community notes may offer space for, say, a variety of views and perspectives. Would you agree with that, sir?
See, this whole fact-checking saga is just the tip of the iceberg. If you look at the entire context, it is in this very context in the previous American election. These big techs have waded immensely into the American political waters. Google and Facebook together and Twitter, when it was under Jack Dorsey, they took certain policy decisions which were directly impacting the Republican Party, which directly impacting the Republican, censorship of Republican voices and censorship, especially the candidate Donald Trump. I mean, these were the platforms which banned a sitting American president in the last days of Donald Trump's previous presidency from being able to operate on Meta and Twitter. They put a lifetime ban on him. Now, since when they saw that Trump was about to come back to the power with enormous support, all these bans were reversed over a course of time. Apologies were offered. Then there's silent visits to his residence after he has won the election. You see three things what Facebook did in the name of fact checking. All those stories about Capitol Hill violence, about abortion, about the vaccine harm, all those were censored, and later it was found that they were indeed certain vaccine harm. And but in retrospect, if you see, the Facebook said that we were doing this under the pressure of American regulators to promote vaccine efficacy and to promote people to take vaccines. But reality was far different. People did have certain side effects of vaccines, and if anybody posted about it, they were blocked from the platforms. Now, same thing about people who were critical to Republican Party Democrats. They were censored in name of Russian influence, bot accounts, or being overpaid. Third, the most interesting story was about the Hunter Biden. When his laptop details were leaked, which were indeed true, about the contents were true, Facebook and many news platforms decided to censor the story, thinking that it was Russian, influence propaganda, and they were carrying defects and all those things. And it was clearly evident that all those contents were absolutely true. There was no fact checking involved. It was just a policy decision under the pressure of Democrats not to show those stories so that it could influence American elections and chances of Joe Biden.
Okay, so more
Now, these
politics, less
decisions
policy.
are now reversed.
Right.
They are now reversed because that is how you make peace with Donald Trump before he comes to power.
Okay.
So I think if they were honest in their intentions, they would have had the same policy across the world. Now, because they're trying to make peace with Donald Trump and follow Elon Musk's approach, they are going for community notes. And you would not be surprised tomorrow if they announce that they'll be paying certain extra money to Twitter to use the very same community notes user to bring them on board to the Meta universe and then Google.
Okay. Professor Zenia, would you see this as a step back for content moderation at a time when disinformation, harmful content are also evolving faster than ever? Or do you think this is also keeping what users have in mind? There's also the commercial aspect to this, because I was looking at how some of the fact checkers work. If content is rated as false, it's downgraded in news feeds so that people see it, fewer people see it. Would that also explain why there are possibly more people who want to see a variety of posts? But what does this mean for content moderation?
Firstly, I'd like to say to your viewers and inform your viewers that fact checking is for the most part a Sisyphean task, right? Which is a never-ending task for Meta, because there's so much content being uploaded from all around the world, right? Meta has often, Facebook, right, has often been blamed for inciting violence, of course, on January 6th, encouraging rioters. Meta has been held responsible for what's been happening in Myanmar, right, against Rohingya Muslims. So fact checking is an extremely difficult process. It is an extremely time consuming process and very expensive indeed. So a categorical decision was made by Mark Zuckerberg, especially after a string of cases, Congress hearings, Republicans challenging him taking, his organization, or Facebook taking down the account of Donald Trump on January 6th for inciting rioters. Many Republicans challenged, what his platform was doing, the censorship on his platform, and they want to scale back from that, right? Mark Zuckerberg wants to scale back from that, and now he wants to focus on freedom freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and continue down the path of allowing users to fact check or including community notes, but not censoring to the degree that Meta was previously, right? So that's the transformation that's happened. And this happened shortly after many Meta executives who pushed Mark Zuckerberg actually to participate more in politics resigned, right? And very recently, Dana White, who is a staunch supporter of Donald Trump, joined the Meta board. So you can see how things have changed post this election, right? Post a lot of criticism that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook faced for censoring political news, for preventing that free debate, for also spreading misinformation about fact checking itself, right? A lot of stories that were actually factual were taken off of that platform because of the fact-checking program. So that is why
Mark
this
Zuckerberg has
change has
also
happened,
called
and Mark has
the
categorically
election
made that
outcome as
decision.
a cultural tipping point.
Going back to your question,
Yes, Ms.
I would just
Napine,
say that,
Zuckerberg has
yes.
also claimed that fact checkers implemented by Meta have been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they have created. The fact that fact-checking itself is, contested in some of the countries. What does this move mean for the fact-checkers community across the world? Because if you look at Meta's program, external grants, they have been predominant revenue streams for global fact-checkers. And according to 2023 survey, it looks like there could be 137 organizations across countries involved in this. So clearly, what does this mean for the fact-checkers community across the world?
I don't see it being good news, for sure. But then let me just take it a little deeper. Now, when you look at fact-checking, one could say that it is subjective. But for Meta to itself claim that the fact-checkers were biased will then be like, you are calling out your own organization or your own partners. So it was for Meta, or for that matter, any social media platform, to lay down certain processes or ground rules to ensure that there is a balance in terms of fact checking. Because, if you step back a little bit and you ask yourself, do we need fact checking? I would think that the response would be yes, of course we need it, especially in today's world of not just misinformation and disinformation, but even, innocuous errors that creep in terms of various stories shared or information, data, messages, whatever shared. So having fact checkers, I would say, is a critical addition. You may want to do it in-house or externally. Externally makes better sense, I suppose, if you want to scale it up. But then if you really want to ensure that it is not biased, then it's critical for you to lay down certain codes of conduct or SOPs to ensure that you root out bias. Ultimately, there is likely to be some bias that will creep in, and that's where then the platform will have to exercise a second level of review. Okay. But these are all issues that they will have to deal with. Ultimately, if it is not fact checkers, then who is going to help a platform to ensure that misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, or fake news is not going to creep in? That's an answer only a platform can give.
Right. Jitin, how do you actually see social media expression evolving under Trump 2.0, specifically with Elon Musk, who owns X, on his side? Because if you look at what Mark Zuckerberg said yesterday, he's talking about censorship, he's talking about the mistakes that he has made. But, just some months ago, he was also talking about how social media is not really responsible for societal ills, arguing that the company should have, pushed back harder on such allegations. So how do you see social media expression evolving under the second term of Donald Trump?
I think it will increase to a great, degree of great extent. Elon Musk has been a champion of free speech. There is no doubt on his track record. I think he has done much, better work than Jack Dorsey or Mark Zuckerberg when it comes to political censorship. Elon has been transparent. Elon has been vocal. Now, being vocal is not, he cannot be labeled as some sort of mischief monger, as he's being put into. But if you look at the bigger cause, even in Indian political space, most of the fact checkers have been left wing, the hardliners who have been having extreme anti-Modi views. They have dominated the space, and it was Facebook and Google which were funding them directly or indirectly through Pointer or fact checking work. Now this is what has, and if you were a neutral media, you never got money. So this whole bias has already creeped in, and I would rather say even only the people who were biased were the paid fact checkers these platforms hired. So all that thing has to go. If someone has to fact check now, coming 1 or 2 years down the line, even in Asia, Southern Asia, people will have to rake in their own money and do their own work. They cannot expect this paid funding from Facebook. And it was also bad for ecosystem, because all these platforms like India, all the media groups. I will not name anyone, but every single media group in India also started a fact checking company or fact checking department in the name of Sach Ka Saath or Aaj Ka Sach or Jhoot Ka Pardafash, and all of them were getting paid handsome money from Facebook and Google, and they stopped reporting critical stories about Meta and Google. Now,
Right.
this is what happens when you have money raking in terms of revenue. You stop criticizing the very bad these platforms
Okay.
have been doing. So I think
Right.
it is good for the entire ecosystem that sanity has been put in, money has been withdrawn, and the free
Right.
speech and the better sense will prevail.
Professor Sinha, how do you see the other decision that Meta will also be loosening its moderation policies, removing restrictions on topics like immigration, gender identity, because these are also sensitive topics. Mark Zuckerberg is claiming that these restrictions are out of touch with mainstream discourse. He said that they've also been used as a tool to shut down opinions. Do you see Meta platforms becoming vibrant spaces now, or do you see more people abandoning them, considering that content moderation could also could also face a setback?
Yeah, I do see more people abandoning social media platforms in general. Well, the average American now, one thing these policies are specific to the United States. So the average American spends about 2 hours on social media platforms, and there has been widespread distrust, right? Especially after what happened with Cambridge Analytica against meta platforms, against social media platforms in general. Especially after Elon Musk took over X, right? People were questioning its credibility. So people are trying to move away as much as they can from social media platforms and using more reliable sources of news, because it is widely known that there is a lot of misinformation on social media, and there's a lot of information that is not accurate, and especially after this change. And one thing I do want to emphasize on is that Meta is not the first platform, right? Before this, Elon Musk got rid of fact checking, YouTube got rid of fact checking, and now it's Meta's turn, right? So there is a growing concern about misinformation on social media, though guidelines still do not allow for pornography, hate speech, any criminal content. But still, there is misinformation, especially with regards to political news and what's been happening in the American politics, and all of that has been attributed to fake news, right? So people will question more what's on these platforms, right, as studies have shown, and try to spend less time getting their news from platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and focus more on more reliable sources of news, which today are being questioned, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, right? So yes, there will be that, but there will be a lot of debate and discussion, and there could still be spread of misinformation from social media, which will be a big threat, especially after these changes from Meta.
Right. Ms. Napinai, last question to you, ma'am, and also very quickly, you spoke about regulation. So while we see a lot of people cheering this shift to community notes, I was looking at Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn, who has posted on X that this move is also a ploy to avoid being regulated. Would that also be one of the considerations? And do you see this as a mix of both politics and smart policy?
Well, I would look at it as a possibility of actually pushing for a regulation, because if you do it, till now they have been doing it voluntarily. So if something is not being done voluntarily, then what is the alternative? That it comes in through a law or regulation, right? So I would actually say it may be counterproductive if their intent is to avoid regulation. And I don't think these are issues which should be left to regulation. It is better for platforms to have a self-regulatory mechanism which will give the assurance that something positive is being done to keep out fake news or hate speech. It's really critical that they take a proactive action in this and do not take it too lightly.
Both of you for joining me on this broadcast. Smart policy, just politics, or a mixed bag? Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg has announced that the company will roll out a new feature called Community Notes in place of stringent formal fact-checking program in the United States of America. Well, some experts have termed this move as part of Meta's latest series of efforts to mend ties with the upcoming Donald Trump administration. But many political undertones to this move and also a reaction to what could be expected in Trump 2.0.